Good afternoon and welcome to the ELI EPA co-sponsored webinar, Legal Careers at the EPA. My name is Chandler Randall and I'm the Manager of Educational Programs here at the Environmental Law Institute, and I am so delighted to welcome everyone to today's program. ELI is proud to offer programming on cutting-edge issues in environmental law and policy, and it is such an honor to have you join us today for this special program. Throughout the program, we will be taking your questions, so please submit your questions through GoTo's question box, and please do not wait until the end. Send in your questions as soon as you think of them. I would like to thank today's outstanding panelists for joining us to lend their expertise to this webinar, and while they will be introduced briefly, the full speaker bios are posted on our website, eli.org, and I would encourage you to check out their expertise and experience in more detail there. As we begin, I would like to briefly introduce today's moderator, Denise Walker. Denise is the Assistant General Counsel leading the FOIA Expert Assistant Team in the National FOIA Office. Denise joined the Office of General Counsel in 2014 with her team, and with her team has marshaled many of the agency's high-profile and complex FOIA projects to completion. Prior to joining the EPA, Denise served at the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, working on the BP oil spill matter, and served as an environmental litigator as a Deputy Attorney General for the state of Indiana. She has over 15 years of experience as a state and federal attorney. Denise is a proud Wildcat with a BS from Kansas State University, and she has completed her JD and MPA at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Thank you so much, and with that, I will turn things over to you to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chandler. Thank you for that introduction, and a huge thank you to ELI for hosting this panel. We're so pleased to be partnering again with ELI to share information about EPA legal careers. Many thanks to our EPA panelists who have joined us here for taking time today to share their stories and experience with you, and I know that you will enjoy learning more about each of them. Nearly everyone has had to adapt in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and for many that has opened up new possibilities in the way that we work, where we live, and how we recruit new folks to join our organizations. For example, I'm joining you today from my home office here in North Dakota, where it is currently -9 degrees, even though my office is in Washington, DC. I met the love of my life and he lives here, so I moved out here to be with him, something that would not really have been possible before. Employers are reimagining how work works, and that's really exciting. But I'd also like to recognize that many of us have faced really serious challenges, including isolation and loneliness. We've lost loved ones and dear colleagues. And all of you who are parents and caregivers, you've just been through a lot over the last 2 years. This hasn't been easy. But I hope that in response, we're all trying to treat each other with more compassion, and especially as we reflect on Black History Month, that we're all working with intentionality to create healthy, just workplaces and communities where everyone can thrive. I am really proud to be a lawyer at EPA and sharing both the celebrations and obstacles that we face working together to take on some of the biggest challenges of the day is amazing. It's fun. Well, I'm an attorney in OGC working in transparency and for the Freedom of Information Act world. As you'll hear, attorneys work for EPA around the nation in all kinds of ways, even around the world. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it takes people with many skills to run a law office. We attorneys, we can't do it alone. And I'm delighted that so many of you are interested in joining us. We need you and your unique talents. Thank you for joining us today. That brings us to today's event, EPA Legal Careers. We're going to talk about legal careers and hear from these panelists. I'll introduce them, and then I'll moderate a guided Q&A for about an hour, and each panelist will have an opportunity to address each question. After that, we'll have about 20 minutes of audience Q&A. Please, as Chandler instructed, put your questions into the Q&A tool as you think of them throughout the event, and don't wait till the end. Also, an important note, this conversation is limited to EPA legal careers. We can't talk about EPA policies, elections, political candidates, those kinds of things. Also, I probably won't be able to get to all of your questions, but you can always follow up with us. Finally, we have many openings available right now for attorneys and legal positions in the agency, and those are available on USA Jobs. I looked this morning and there are quite a few openings, and we'll get into that more later in the presentation. With that, I will introduce the panelists. First, we have Krishna Bhatt. Krishna is from a lot of places, but she's currently from Charlotte. She graduated from the George Mason University School of Law in 2014. Following graduation, she was a legal fellow at the Federal Communications Commission, where she first did FOIA work. Since then, she's worked at the Department of Energy and USDA's FOIA department. She joined EPA in February of 2019, right after the government shutdown, as an attorney advisor for the National FOIA Office. Outside of the office, Krishna enjoys dancing, Pilates, and watching most things on TV. Next, we have Manuel Ronquillo. Manuel is the acting deputy director of EPA's Federal Facilities Enforcement Office. Prior to his current role, he served as senior assistant regional counsel in EPA's Region 3 CERCLA 2 branch. Manuel also spent 12 years as an attorney advisor at EPA headquarters in the Office of Site Remediation Enforcement and in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. He has also served as EPA as Equal Employment Opportunity Counselor, Assistant Deputy Ethics Official, and Hispanic Employment Program Manager. Manuel is licensed to practice law in the state of New York, received his JD from Pace University, Elizabeth Howe School of Law, and earned his Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse University. Thank you for joining us, Manuel. Tracy Shepard is a senior attorney advisor in the U.S. EPA Office of General Counsel, Cross-Cutting Issues Law Office. She counsels the agency on NEPA, environmental justice, information quality, and other cross-cutting legal issues. She received a BS and MS in civil engineering from Clemson University and her JD from South Texas College of Law, where she served as the editor on a law review. Tracy started with EPA in 2000 as an assistant regional counsel in Region 6, where her work focused on Superfund enforcement. In 2002, she transferred to the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance in EPA headquarters, where she worked in cleanup enforcement and regional support. In 2006, Tracy joined the Office of General Counsel, Solid Waste and Emergency Response Law Office, where she worked on CERCLA, RCRA, and the Clean Water Act issues. In 2010, Tracy served as senior counsel to the Environment Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives, Energy and Commerce Committee. Prior to joining EPA, Tracy was an environmental engineer and compliance specialist in the petrochemical industry in Texas and Louisiana, and worked as a sole practitioner in Houston, Texas, specializing in real property, entertainment, and family law. Finally, we have Victor Zertucci. Victor currently serves as an attorney advisor at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency headquarters in Washington, D.C. Within EPA, Victor works in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, or as we call it, OECA. He has been with the agency since 2019, and his practice includes clarifying liability concerns to foster cleanup and reuse of contaminated properties. His work also focuses on integrating environmental justice principles into enforcement for overburdened and disadvantaged communities. Before joining EPA, Victor represented low-income communities across 114 counties in Texas as an environmental justice legal aid attorney. Victor earned an LLM in energy and environmental law from Pace University, a JD from the University of Houston Law Center, and a BA in corporate communications from the University of Houston. So again, thank you to all of our wonderful panelists, and I'm really excited to talk to all of you. The first question I have for each of you, starting with Krishna, is could you please tell us more about your background before EPA and what you do at the agency currently?
Sure. Hi, Denise. Hi, everyone. So my name is Krishna, as Denise introduced me. I have mostly just worked in FOIA pretty much my entire legal career since I left law school. I dabbled a little bit in FCC, like communications matters, but then I jumped straight into FOIA. So I've worked at 3 different agencies now doing FOIA work. And yeah, so that's kind of my area of expertise, as it were. Quite familiar with the statute, quite familiar with its application, project management, because sometimes FOIA requests get unruly. Day to day, my work at EPA is within the National FOIA Office. I'm a member of the FOIA Expert Assistance Team, the FEAT as we're called. And what we do is we take large scale FOIA requests. So either just numerous requests about the same subject that come in around the same time. So for example, we had a lot of requests come in surrounding the agency's reaction to COVID and what was going to happen to enforcement cases and things like that. So it's a large group of requests all surrounding the same subject matter. So just corralling all of those together, project managing, and it can also be just even one request that's very, may get a lot of media attention or is, potentially politically volatile or something like that. So, so that's one aspect of what I do. I also work on the FOIA policy and procedures for the entire agency. So that's setting best practices and things like that. I'm also working to update the FOIA regulations. So each agency has regulations with which they implement the FOIA statute. And we have been working on those, did one update recently. So yeah, it's kind of a wide variety of work. It's a combination of legal work and policy work within our office.
Thank you, Krishna. Manuel.
Yeah, so I think I took a very direct route to EPA. I got hired on right after graduating law school. So I spent my entire career here at EPA, both in headquarters and in Region 3 here in Philadelphia. As you mentioned, I'm currently the acting deputy director of the Federal Facilities Enforcement Office, which is located in Washington, D.C. So I'm able to remotely work for that office. And in this role that I'm currently in, there's a lot of policy aspects to it, higher level issues and impacting the agency. So helping to implement and coordinate EJ, our newfound, or rather our reinforced EJ stance now as an agency. Also, our office handles interactions with other federal agencies when other federal agencies are in need of compliance help or violate environmental laws. Those issues come into our office for additional review sometimes, and for help and for coordination, as those kinds of matters seem to often get elevated just due to the agency to agency interactions that are involved. So my day-to-day, it is very packed full of meetings and a lot of coordination all around. So it's very hectic for me at this point in time. Just prior to being in this role, and the role I'll go back to in a few months is I was in Region 3 in the Office of Regional Counsel, where as basically a site attorney, I would have my portfolio of cases, either cleanup sites or administrative penalty cases that I will work with civil investigators or inspectors and case developers to kind of build cases for where we think there's been violations of environmental statutes, or to try and get cost recovery or cleanup done at Superfund sites. So it's very different. It was a lot more almost me oriented in the region, where I could push my work at my own pace in a way. And here currently it's a lot, and I'm enjoying it, but it's a different pace.
Yes, they keep you running at headquarters, I tell you. Thank you, Manuel. Tracy, what about you? Tell us more about your background before EPA, at EPA, what you do at the agency now. You've got so much experience. You're on mute, I think.
Technologically challenged. Before EPA, I worked in the petrochemical industry in Texas and Louisiana, first as an environmental engineer and then as an environmental compliance specialist. So a lot of what I did in those jobs I call quasi-legal. I had to be up on all of the environmental statutes under RCRA, CERCLA, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. So I was responsible at different facilities for making sure we were in compliance with all of the relevant environmental statutes and regulations. I wrote environmental operating procedures. I wrote spill prevention and countermeasure, control and countermeasure plans for oil facilities. And so after doing that work for a while, I went to law school in Texas, South Texas College of Law. And after that, worked for myself for a year. That was not a lot of fun. You have to be able to hunt and kill and eat your own work as opposed to having it served to you on a platter. So I did that for a year and then applied for, I had always been interested in EPA. You know, coming out of school with a master's in civil engineering, we learned a lot about hydrology and soil and, you know, cleanups and things like that. I had a lot of background in some of the basics there. And then after working as an environmental engineer for 2 different petrochemical companies, I felt that EPA was a next best stop for me to kind of ride with the white hats for a while. So I started with EPA in Region 6 as a Superfund attorney in the Office of Regional Counsel, was there for 2 years, transferred in 2002 to the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, where I continued to do Superfund work, but from the Regional Support Division, where we provided support to the regional attorneys working on Superfund cases, and we also developed guidance documents for those, you know, for use by those attorneys. In 2006, I transferred into the Office of General Counsel, first in the Solid Waste and Emergency Response Law Office, where I did more Superfund work, RCRA hazardous waste work, Clean Water Act 311, which is the oil spill regulations, oil spill statute and regulations under that. And then left the agency for a year, went to Capitol Hill to work as senior counsel to the Environment Subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And that was an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. For those who've been on Capitol Hill and enjoyed it, I just don't have that DNA. Came back to the agency in 2011 and have been working in the cross-cutting issues legal law office, excuse me, first jointly with the solid waste office, but now full-time. And I'm split between two different practice groups, the regulatory issues practice group and the community and ecosystems, I always forget that one, practice group. So I work in NEPA compliance, environmental justice. I am sort of a liaison, first point of contact for legal issues that come up through the Office of Research and Development. I do a lot of work with them. I also support the Office of Children's Health Protection. And so my work varies from day to day. I might be working on a brief, you know, helping DOJ on a brief for some defensive litigation at one point, working on a memo on a particular issue related to something, say, cumulative impacts and our authority to address them. Yeah, I can't describe to you a typical day, and I think the other panelists would probably agree that our work comes at us from sometimes from 2 or 3 different places, you know, different angles, different emphasis, but it's all wonderful, truly rewarding work.
Thank you, Tracy. I first met Tracy when I was at NOAA, actually, and was working with her on the BP oil spill. So I've known Tracy for a long time. And we were actually office mates before the pandemic, which was great. So finally, Victor, why don't you tell us about your background and what you're doing at the agency now?
Sure, thanks, Denise. Yes, so before joining EPA, I am originally from Texas. So I went to school with the intent, kind of the understanding of wanting to go to law school eventually. So I was in Houston. I got a degree in corporate communications, focusing mostly on the oil and gas sector, which is big in Texas, obviously. So focusing on health, safety, and the environment communications of those type of industrial parties. So I went into law school with that idea. I went to law school in Texas. Also, I got my JD there in Houston. Again, a big focus and emphasis on oil and gas and environmental law from a different perspective than many schools in the country focus on them. So an interesting background there. Throughout law school, I did moot court. So after well, in my third year, I got the opportunity to participate in a moot court competition in New York and at Pace University in White Plains. And I got an invitation to do a master's in law. So I focused on energy and environmental law there in New York, which is a one-year program that allows you to specialize in a certain area of law. So I focused on energy and climate change, and it was a really rewarding experience. So I was licensed in Texas, and I didn't want to sit for the New York bar, so I came back to Texas to practice for a little while in the nonprofit sphere, as Denise mentioned. There, I worked on representing. I worked as a legal aid attorney, and I represented low-income communities, low-income individuals, focusing on equitable development, fair housing, and environmental justice issues. So that was a really fun experience, and that work was divided between state and federal and local issues. So I had cases that were for zoning commissions, as well as the Texas Council on Environmental Quality for like contested case hearings, for those types of issues, for permits that were going up near communities. And then lastly, there are several Superfund sites that are in Dallas, that are in Region 6, and especially Dallas has a very storied history about environmental justice and environmental racism, and I was plugged into the communities there and representing them with respect to their Superfund concerns. And so when I was in Texas and working on the nonprofit side, I kept on bumping into this idea of, man, how do you get past this policy? How do you get past what the EPA is doing? And so I looked at it and I said, well, what if you actually go and work on the policies at EPA headquarters? That's a good way to fix it. So I made that shift to EPA, and I've been in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, specifically in site remediation enforcement, which is cleanup. So that's predominantly Superfund, which Tracy and Manuel mentioned before, RCRA corrective action, and I've been there since 2019 and still doing a lot of exciting work within OECA at headquarters. Most of my work focuses on redevelopment, so redevelopment of these contaminated properties and putting them back to the best and highest beneficial use of communities, but making sure that cleanups are still protective of human health and the environment. So that's a really interesting aspect of my work that I enjoy getting to see, and getting to see the tangible benefits from having something be, just a landfill to having it shift to be a landfill with solar panels on top of it that provide green and renewable energy. So I think that's really cool and a really nice and tangible thing that I get to see about my work, and it still ties to my roots and my values of environmental justice and focusing on that. And especially recently, we can get into this later, but right now I'm in a detail, which is like a short period of time where you get to like try out like a 3-month trial of a job. So I'm the special assistant for our office director. So getting to see a broader way of issues and all the things that the agency is working on, and it's an interesting time to be at EPA for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely an interesting time to be at EPA. Victor, thanks for sharing how you find your job to be valuable. I'd like to hear about that from all of the panelists. Krishna, what are some ways that you find your job at EPA to be satisfying or valuable?
Sure. So Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, is basically a transparency statute. Allows almost any individual or company, with a few exceptions, to request documents from a federal agency. And, you know, just as a general thing, I think that's great. It provides transparency as to what the government is doing, what, you know, what policies are in place, how those are being implemented, things like that. So I find my work rewarding in the individual case requests and stuff that I may work on that really do, you can see how this information is helping the community. You know, you can get information on, you know, Superfund sites, what's going on with the cleanup. And it just, I think it offers a level of insight into what your government is doing and puts the public in a good place to ask for something different or push for changes in things that they may think are not working. So I think that providing transparency to the people for their own government, and gives them the ability to ask for change and ask for things to be better. So I think that's a big rewarding part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Krishna. I would agree. I work with Krishna actually in the Freedom of Information Act office, and it's really rewarding for me to be able to get that information to the public, and then they're able to move forward and ask good questions based on that information or advocate for change. Manuel, what about you? Do you find rewarding about your work at EPA? Satisfying?
Yeah, thanks, Denise. You know, I think in general, I find the whole, my whole career here at EPA rewarding. You know, there's a mission to EPA, and it's always something that you can put your hat on, you know, that you could rest assured that, you know, we're at an agency that has a defined mission, and that it's something I believe in. You know, currently, I think in the Federal Facilities Enforcement Office, what I find satisfying here is really our role as a regulator and an oversight over the federal government itself, in a way, where we're really trying to make sure that the federal government is policing itself and holding itself to the same standards that we're asking private parties to live up to. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of push and pull within the government, where we're not necessarily one monolithic party, even though, you know, we're all under the same executive. So it really is satisfying to you know, as Tracy referred to earlier, you know, be on the side of the white hats, where we you know, we think we're the good guys, and we're trying to make sure that we're doing right, you know, and ensuring public health and the environment are protected. And it is satisfying to be able to try and hold other federal agencies accountable the way that they should be.
Interesting. Thank you. Tracy, what about you? You're on mute again.
It would happen again.
Technology.
As you would notice from our job titles, we're called, at least the few of us, not mine well at the moment, attorney advisors. And I like the advisor part of my job a whole lot. And because we get the opportunity to help the programs accomplish what they want to, you know, what they want to do in a legally, you know, defensible, legally sufficient manner. And so it's enriching, it's rewarding to me to work with so many dedicated people who have taken the mission of protecting human health and the environment truly to heart, and to be able to say to them, yes, you can do what it is you want to do, but you might need to tweak some aspect. You might, if you're putting out a regulation to address PFAS, which I'm sure people have heard a whole lot about. Not that I work on PFAS, but that's an issue that's been getting a lot of press and interest. There are ways to do regulations to make sure that, one, they will stand up. They are actually, supported by the text of the statute that we're trying to implement. And so we as attorneys get to advise on that. If they want to interpret a provision of the statute in a way that pushes the boundaries, we will advise, well, you're pushing the boundary here, but if we think you're still, this is still a valid interpretation of the statute, but just be aware that here are some of the risks of taking this particular approach, and here are some of the ways you might be challenged if this rule is implemented. So I like being able to help things go right on the front end, so that we don't have to put the attorney hat on and have to, find ways to defend these actions after they take place. So to me, being able to help get the work of the agency done, in the way that the programs hope to have it done, but also to make sure that we've checked for all the legal minefields that might occur depending on how policy choices are made. That to me makes my work at EPA rewarding, interesting, challenging, and satisfying.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I really get a lot of joy out of that too, helping folks in the programs to do their FOIA projects in a way that is legally defensible and sound, so that we don't end up with challenges on the back end and the public gets what they need. So that's really rewarding for me too. And then Victor, I know you spoke about it a little bit more, or tell us a little bit more about what it is that you find satisfying or rewarding about your work.
Sure. I think that, well, let me start with this. When I interviewed for EPA, I think at the time the office director and deputy office director had been at the agency for 27 and 29 years. And my question to them was like, what keeps you here at the agency for so long? Especially as someone who comes in with the idea of like changing jobs every few years. And the responses I got back were the work and the people. And as Manuel mentioned, and as Tracy mentioned, I think that it's, with respect to the work, it's challenging, it's intellectually stimulating work, especially in environmental law. Even though EPA has been doing this for 50 years, you always get new issues, you always get new developments. And especially at EPA, we're focusing today on the lawyers, but there are also so many different folks that support and work through the different issues. You have people from investigative backgrounds or science backgrounds, and you get to interact with on a daily basis such a rich diversity of backgrounds and perspectives. And I think that that is really interesting. And you get to work on issues that have real impacts on individuals every day. I mean, you have people need clean air and clean water to survive. And at the agency, we're working to make sure that we protect human health and the environment. These are things that are essential to not only us in the United States, but on a global scale as well. And so being able to work on those type of emerging issues that are constantly challenging and that have real implications, and being able to see the impact of your work, it makes sense that people would want to stay at the agency for 20, 30 years. And that's not an odd scenario. We have plenty of people who are doing that. And so, they're reaching retirement age, which is good. And I hope to encourage and hope to see new generations of environmental lawyers and scientists and investigators and folks joining the ranks of EPA, because there's so much to learn at the agency.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Victor. So my next question for everyone is about what you're touching on here about the variety of backgrounds that people bring to the agency. My question is, how has your background influenced, impacted, or intersected with your work? And do you think that your office benefits from having attorneys of a variety of backgrounds, and how? I realize it's a two-part question, so if you need me to repeat it, I'm happy to do that. But Krishna, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Sure. So I guess in one way, I've rarely worked with someone else who has come from the same background as me, as far as like where my family comes from and all of that. So I hope I provide a unique perspective, if not directly related to FOIA, but just everyone's life experience is really amazing to hear, and where they've come from and stuff. And I think even if you day to day don't realize that, you know, having a diverse group of people in an office is, especially with something like FOIA that's so rooted in the statute, and it's just, that's what it is, kind of, and of course there's nuances to everything, but you don't often think that a variety of backgrounds will make a difference, but honestly it does, because for example, when you're rewriting the policies, you're rewriting the procedures for the agency, you really do have to take into account, okay, I'm writing this for an entire agency, not just for me. People in other offices, people in other regions, people who are located different places around the US, their abilities, their needs, their functionality is going to be different, just depending on where they live, their background, their abilities. So even though it's pretty procedural, the FOIA is a pretty kind of procedural statute, it does help to have people pipe in and say, well, actually, if you do it that way, it's going to be difficult for a certain group of people, and so you have to rework everything and figure out, how am I going to make this accessible, not just within the agency for the people processing these FOIA requests, but also for requesters who are submitting FOIA requests. Not everyone has access to high-speed internet. Not everyone has laptops or smartphones, things like that. So this requesting information of the government from the government shouldn't be limited to just people who have those things, or the ability to acquire those things. So it's kind of interesting from that point, because in your own head, you're stuck in your point of view, and you're like, yeah, I have the internet, so everybody has the internet, which is not true, So it's just it's having someone in your office being able to raise their hand and say, well, no, you're not thinking about this demographic of people, and we need to make sure our procedures and our regulations include everybody. So I think that's kind of where it'll intersect. I can't think of a specific example for me personally, but I know it has happened when we're having these types of discussions. So
yeah, thanks, Krishna. A really good example that comes to mind is we recently had some folks in our community, like you said, raise their hand and say, hey, we have gendered language in our template letters. Is there some way we can take that out? And we thought, yeah, we can do that. So we did. And so that makes those communication pieces more accessible for everyone. So it's those kinds of things where I really see it, a day to day making an impact. Manuel, what about you? How's your background influenced, impacted, or intersected with your work? And do you think your office benefits from having attorneys of a variety of backgrounds?
Thank you. Yeah, obviously I do think that having a variety of backgrounds helps our office. Just even having people from different areas of the country, which is very common here, well, down in DC, you get a very, you get a mix of viewpoints that can, help inform national policies. And in the EPA, we do a lot of things nationally, where we do a lot of work groups with the regions. So you get different personalities and different takes of what will work in different areas, or what might work in one area might not work in another area. So definitely that kind of diversity is instrumental to how we do things here in EPA. My own background is I think back to it often these days. Now that I'm here in headquarters working on EJ, environmental justice related issues, just to think of, I think back to specific burdens perhaps that I had or growing up, that even growing up I didn't think were burdens. It's like if you grow up a certain way, you just think it's normal. So growing up basically next to a highway, in the direct landing pattern of international flights to JFK, it was just what it was. We dealt with that noise and that pollution, and it was just normal. So now when I think of environmental justice here at the agency, like I try to consider, just because something might be normal or is what commonplace or is the way things are now, doesn't mean that that's the way it should continue to be. And that's kind of our whole push, where we're trying to take these disproportionate impacts out of areas and communities where these impacts have been concentrated, and to kind of level the playing field a little bit, and to bring some actual results to alleviate health and environmental harms to these areas. So it really does hit close to home to me, and I think it's kind of nice for me to be able to bring my background into play in this area.
Great, thank you so much, Manuel. I'm glad you're able to do that too. Tracy, what about you? I know you're going to take yourself off mute this time. Wait, I still can't hear you. What happened?
Because now I'm off mute.
There you go.
Sorry.
No,
So the question about my background in environmental engineering and environmental compliance definitely played a huge role in my being able to be successful, I think, at EPA. One, because it helped me to speak the language of the programs that I support, because I worked, in petrochemical facilities, and doing environmental work, all of the environmental work across a facility. So not just, specializing in air or in water, but having to know a little bit, jack of all trades, I guess, in all areas of environmental law. Coming to EPA, that served me very well, because I came in familiar with the work. Not that I don't think that you have to have the kind of background I have in engineering, or having worked in the petrochemical or any kind of manufacturing industry role, because you learn in law school to you've got to have the sharpness of mind to ask the questions when you don't know something, be able to feel comfortable asking questions. These folks in the programs, they want you to understand what they're doing, because if you don't understand what they're doing, you can't do your job to help them. And that's what we are. We are here to help the programs. I know they think the lawyers show up and, oh my God, life is going to be miserable. But no, we are here. We are as committed to the mission as any program specialist, any toxicologist. And so so being able to come in, and if you aren't already well versed in the language, then there's so many resources available that to help you get up to speed. And you ask, well, I don't understand anything about PFAS. Tell me what to read. I'm sorry, I keep using PFAS as an example. Let's pick any nasty pesticide, for example. Nasty pesticide X, I know nothing about. And they will help you to get enough information so that you can do your job. So I don't think you necessarily have to have an environmental science degree or an environmental, working background like I did in order to be successful. in terms of my personal experience, like, Manuel, I, grew up, I'm first generation college in my family. We grew up, not knowing that we were, poor and exposed to things we shouldn't have been exposed to, and, all of the inequities that come with being, my parents don't have high school diplomas, so my brother and I were the first in our generation to get college degrees. And so, but we bring to the table an understanding of life from all of those different levels. My mother worked as a maid. My father worked, was military and then went as a civilian employee in the Navy. And so I see the world, I think, differently than others who may have come through different paths and different experiences. And I hope that what I bring to the table is a perspective that is, informed by, my education, my life experiences, my work experiences, my understanding of the world. And I think you'll find that kind of variety in one thing I guess I like about EPA is that it is diverse. It could be a lot more diverse in some areas with regard to representation, but these people are committed to making sure that life for all people, not just the ones who look like me or look like you, is full of clean water, clean air, clean land. Poisons aren't being, foisted upon us without safety, safety considerations taken into account. But I think everybody, we all, when we work on any project, work with any program, we're all bringing that mix of all of our experiences, whatever they might be, and then broadening them by virtue of being around people who bring different things to the table. I think that's what, for me, makes this place a great place to work. And I don't think lawyers have to walk through the door with any particular background, but whatever it is, you bring it to the table and you use it, you utilize it in order to make your time and your efforts at EPA the very best it can be.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I have learned so much from my colleagues at EPA because people are so willing to share information and their stories and their backgrounds and say, hey, I see this a different way, or let's talk about this. And so that's been really rewarding and enriching for me in my time at EPA. And I agree with you, Tracy. It was helpful for me to have a science background. I think Chandler mentioned I have a BS from Kansas State in life science and biology and natural resource management. And that was really helpful to me coming into an agency like EPA to have some of that scientific background. So when I'm talking to the various program offices and I'm working with them about, like you said, PFAS, we've got requests about PFAS. Tell them, well, okay, I'm able to get up to speed quickly on what those technical conversations are and what might be in the documents that are in the record sets, for example. We're working on a big project like Flint, where the public is asking for a lot of information, understanding the technical pieces of that and being able to get up to speed quickly with those client offices, program offices. It's very, very helpful. So I would agree with all of the things that you guys are sharing. Victor, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, unlike Denise and Tracy, I did not have a science background. I came in with basically a liberal arts and kind of business pseudo degree from undergrad, and then went straight into law school. But after 3 years at EPA, fortunately, there are enough folks in the program side or with science background like Tracy and Denise who are willing to walk me through. And now I can talk about, light non-aqueous phase liquid, like I knew it, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Like if you would have told college me that I would understand what those words mean, like he would have laughed at you and said, no way. But so I didn't have a science background, but what I did bring to the table was an understanding of both interpersonal and organizational communications and how that interplays, right? And so I think it takes all types of folks, especially if you're working on policy area or guidance area, to understand, as Krishna talked about, we represent not just a certain sector of the community, but we serve, the entire nation. And so you want to make sure that stuff is accessible and that it's put in a way that's communicated to folks that they can understand. And also interpersonal communications. There are, for better or worse, there are some silos that exist in government. So when you're talking with either inside of the agency or with other agencies like Housing and Urban Development, or for Manuel's work for other federal agencies, it's important to make sure that you understand the dynamics and the interplays and the politics with a small p kind of intersections there. And so I think that fortunately I had a good understanding of those dynamics and have honed those skills here. And so you're able to supplement some of the technical knowledge with the skill set that you bring in. So I think it definitely takes, I mean, we work on complex issues, so it makes sense that we would want to have as many diverse viewpoints as possible working on those issues. That way we don't have any blind spots. We don't have anything that we miss. We have a 360 view of an issue and understanding of it. So not a science background, but slowly but surely learning things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that, you know, there are a lot of ways to be a lawyer in the Environmental Protection Agency. And, you know, we've got people here doing enforcement work. We've got people doing FOIA work just on this panel, right? We've got people doing environmental justice and circular work. But there's also, you know, civil rights work to be done at the agency. We have an environmental appeals board where there are lawyers working to hear cases. There's plenty of examples of other ways to be an attorney. We have human resource issues. We have all kinds of issues, information law issues that are beyond FOIA, Privacy Act, and, you know, new and emerging technologies. And several of you have alluded to R6 or R3. And for those who don't know on the webinar, those are our regional council offices, and being a regional part of the regional council is a great experience for attorneys as well. And so R6, you might have picked up from the conversation, is Texas, and Region 3, I believe, is Philadelphia. And so, you know, there's 10 regional offices with lots of opportunities around the nation. And we have opportunities currently available in several regions as well as headquarters on the USA Jobs right now. So we have about 6 minutes left until we're going to turn it over to our audience Q&A. But I did want to touch on what it looks like to apply for a federal job, because I'm sure that's what a lot of our folks who are in attendance want to hear about. How do I get a job at EPA, right? How does this actually work? So I know for a lot of people, applying for a federal government job seems kind of like a black box, you know, or a mystery. So do any of you have tips on applying through USA Jobs, or can share what you think is important to highlight in your application materials? And so Christian, I'll start with you again.
Sure, thanks, Denise. My biggest tip when applying for the government, mirror the language that is in the job posting in your resume. So you will, for each, and this is just general, not just for applying for the government, but in general, applying for jobs, do not use your same standard resume every time. You need to tweak it to be specific to the job you're applying for. And specifically for the government, look at the language they are using in the job posting and use that language in your resume to describe your qualifications. I'm not saying make things up, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying use the same verbiage and stuff that's used in the job posting in your resume, because that's the best way that your resume is going to get flagged to be moved up to the next step, and how you're getting closer to that interview. That's been my experience, at least. You don't have to include everything you've ever done on your resume. Really tailor it for the job that you are applying for. So yeah, that's my number one biggest tip, is rework your resume every time you apply for a new job. I know it's time consuming, I know it's annoying, but it really does make a difference. So
Thanks, Christian. Manuel.
I really think you kind of need to be quick to the draw on USA Jobs. Most postings are open maybe for a couple of weeks, but on top of that, a lot of them cap out at maybe 100 resumes or 200 resumes. So if you're not in there early, you won't even get considered. It'll be closed. So even though we should follow Christian's advice and really try and tailor your resumes, you should always have that just in the back of your head that's something you need to do and to do it quickly. Don't sit around on something that you intend to apply for. In addition, on revising your resumes, you really do need to focus on what the announcement is asking for, and make sure you put in what's important and relevant, because as a reviewer of resumes, we cannot assume anything. If it's not in there, we can't assume you have an experience. So if you want it known, it has to be in there. Those are my 2 points of advice on that.
Thanks, Manuel. Tracy, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, muted again. I think you should focus on making sure if you can include a cover letter that you spell out fairly clearly, I think, why you're interested in the job, what you bring to the table. I know as a brand new attorney with perhaps no prior work experience, you're gonna have to rely on, what you've done in internships or, accomplishments you had in school, in law school. But I think you ought to make sure that you're, again, kind of same as what Krishna said, you have to tailor that document as well to the job that you're applying for, and to spell out as clearly as you can why you think you are the best candidate for the opening that you're applying for. You've got to put your best foot forward. If you're just sending a generic, "Hi, my name is X and I'd like to be employed by EPA because the environment is wonderful and, go EPA, sign, X," that's not going to get you very far, because these jobs, I don't know if Denise mentioned, we have several openings, but we get hundreds of applicants for every job opening that we have. And so a group of people are going to go through those, let's say there's 200 applications for one position. That's going to be whittled down possibly to 10 or 15, maybe 20 people who might get a first round interview. And so if your resume and your cover letter, your writing sample, whatever it is that you need to submit, isn't up to snuff, and even if you've done a good cover writing sample, proofread it before you submit it. Look at it again, revisit it again. Just again, you need to put together the best application package you can do. The resume needs to be tight, the cover letter, whatever you're submitting. If your grades are not stellar, then sell yourself on some of those other points.
Thanks, Tracy. I agree with all of that. Victor, what are your thoughts?
So thinking about this, I think it comes down to kind of 3 things: to be prepared, to be organized, and to do your research. So being prepared, like Manuel mentioned, the USA job openings fill up quickly, and they are not open for very long. I was fortunate enough to have a former professor send me the job posting, and she sent in the subject line, "Apply for this now." So I took the time away from what I was doing, and fortunately I was prepared. I had my resume, I had my cover letter, I had references, and when you're applying for the government for certain positions, they ask for where you've lived for all these different times, and for personal references and various types of things. So be prepared and have that, and be organized, have it where you can have it accessible. Also, on the preparedness, when you get to the if you get to the interview point, take the time to do your research on both the organization and the people that you're going to be working with. When I came for the interview for my job, I was sure to look up, what did my office director do? What did my deputy office director do? Who was going to be interviewing me, and what did I have in common with them? Where are the points that we have common interests? That way, when I'm there during the interview process, we can talk about those things and your real personality can shine. Because if you make it to that point, you're most likely qualified for the position. It's just a matter of, are you going to mesh well and get along with the folks in the organization? So you want to make sure that you're a good fit, both that you're a good fit for them and then that's a good fit for you, because you want to make sure that the type of work that you're doing is something that you're going to enjoy and that you're going to find valuable and find meaning in. So I think that, do your research, be prepared, and be organized are the top three.
Man, what great advice. I echo all of these tips. I'll also just add that as somebody that's been a part of several hiring actions now, now that I'm a assistant general counsel, if you don't get selected, it's okay. Like they all said, there's a lot of people applying. And I tell you what, the last hiring action I did, we narrowed it down to 10 people, and I would have been happy hiring any of them, quite frankly. I mean, we have such great applicants, and it's really not something that you should be beating yourself up over if you don't get selected. To keep trying, and take it back. If you're able to get feedback, take it. And like Tracy said, have people look over your application materials, practice interviewing, do all of those things. The other sort of practical tip that I would add is when you go to upload your materials to USA Jobs, you've made it a little more tricky. And so now there's a two-factor authentication process or something that has made it a little more challenging than might have been a few years ago. So make sure that you've tested your computer equipment, you understand what the requirements are. You don't want to find yourself scrambling at 11:59 trying to figure out how to upload your materials that you've worked on for the last 2 weeks. So make sure that you understand exactly what the requirements are when you go to upload those materials. With that, I am going to turn to some of our audience questions that my colleague Seth Buxbaum has been collecting for us and is feeding to me on my chat box over here. So thank you all for submitting these questions, and we will turn to these next. Our first question is, as someone who wants to protect the environment, I'm worried about having to defend EPA against suits from environmental organizations. With that in mind, do you ever feel that the political or bureaucratic nature of working at EPA limits your ability to protect the environment? And I'll just remind everybody that this is a career discussion, so we can get into some of these things, but we're not getting into like sort of political or policy discussions as part of this. So just a reminder about that. But so with that, I will turn it over to Krishna to take a stab at answering this question.
Oh boy, I gotta be careful with this one. I think like in any job, not just in the government, I think any corporate job you may have or something like that, people are, even if you have, we have a great mission here at EPA, and I think people truly do believe in it. People still do at some point think of their own individual selves in the actions they take. I don't think, maybe not always consciously, maybe subconsciously, and I think this can happen not just in the government. So yeah, sometimes you will run up against people who are going to fight you on what you think is the correct path forward or the proper way to do something. May not always be politically motivated. It may not, or anything like that. I think it's just, like we said before, everyone is coming from different backgrounds and everyone is coming from different experiences. So it can be tough sometimes, as Tracy said, you're in an advisor role, right? So you're advising them like, this is what you should be doing and these are the risks to what you're doing. But you're, at the end of the day, you're not in that decision-making role. Not always, maybe eventually, but I'm certainly not in the decision-making role. So I think it can be tough, the same way it could be in any other job situation, where sometimes you do have to back down on certain things and say, okay, it's, you know, I've advised you the best I can. Now it is your decision to make on what path you want to take forward. You can, yeah, I think, and like I said, I don't think that's specific to the government or to EPA. I think that can happen anywhere. And that's just something you have to learn to navigate. Where are you really, really going to push, and where are you going to be like, okay, I'm going to take a step back here, you know, and you move forward how you want to, you know. So
Thanks, Krishna. Manuel, what's been your experience with this question? And to just repeat it, the question is, do you feel that the political or bureaucratic nature of working at EPA limits your ability to protect the environment?
You know, I'll try to keep it short, but you know, I don't think so. You know, and I sympathize with what the question says. You know, because sure, we, you know, there's, you know, the Sierra clubs and those kinds of people out there, but then there's also the other side of the spectrum. And as EPA, you know, as a regulator, we have to walk the line down the middle. And I think that here at EPA, we're trying to do the most good as much of the time as we can. So you know, I go home at night and I feel great about what I'm doing here at EPA. I don't think that we're being hamstrung to not do our jobs here. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Manuel. Tracy, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I'm going to stop trying to answer questions because apparently I don't have the savvy that's necessary for this.
Oh yeah, you do.
It all comes down to, you know, you have to be zealous advocates for your clients. And so, you know, as Manuel said, you know, there's a line that has to be walked here. You know, we can't be job killing in the you know, in our goal to protect, you know, every tree, every, you know, tadpole, you know, every person. So the compromises have to be made, and sometimes, you know, you hold your nose a little bit, but our job is to make sure that whatever that compromise, whatever that decision is, that we've done what we can to make it as legally defensible and legally sufficient as possible, so that when that challenge comes, we're able to say, you know, yeah, they're challenging on X or Y, you know, challenging a provision on some basis, but we can say, no, we've done our job to make sure that, you know, that it's defensible, that we can show how we've satisfied whatever statutory you know, requirement there is in the development of that action. And I'm sorry, there's somebody going past my window. It was disturbing. Apologies. Anyway, so again, we have to be zealous advocates. We have to make sure that we are doing our job to defend the actions taken by the programs that we support. And sometimes that does, you know, leave a, you know, bad taste. But at the end of the day, if you've done your job correctly, you know, that's all that's asked of you.
Thanks, Tracy. What about you, Victor?
I think the point of the question, I sympathize with it as well. But I would say that it's not just non-governmental organizations. You have tons of stakeholders that you're trying to please and to make happy. You have states, you have local agencies, you have NGOs who represent, you know, environmental interests. You have industrial stakeholders. So it's not just one person that you have to consider when you're taking actions and when you're doing your day-to-day work. I think that, like all things, it's a complicated issue that, and by the nature of the work, you're going to have, you know, political with a big P, some implications in your work. And I think that's just the nature of being an executive agency. That's part of the bureaucracy, it's part of the government. So you're going to have those kind of implications for the work that you do. But I think that at the end of the day, that the end goal is protection of the human health and the environment. And the way that we go to achieve that may be different even between people with similar viewpoints. So I think that it's important to keep that end goal in mind in all the work that you're doing, and then make sure that from a legal perspective, that it's well reasoned, that it's rational, that it's defensible, that those are the kind of things that you keep in mind in your day-to-day work.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I also sympathize with the sort of sentiment in the question, but I would also point out that, litigation is not always a bad thing. If the agencies, hasn't taken the right path or hasn't interpreted something correctly, then litigation can help, move an agency to where it should be, or at least, help folks consider the next path. So I certainly don't worry about the agency getting sued so much, because I feel like it's part of the process, right? It's just part of the process that keeps us moving in the direction that we need to go. So, but it is challenging sometimes. I think it's challenging for any attorney, to be able to sort of set aside their own sort of opinions about things occasionally and say, okay, well, this isn't exactly how I would go, but this is where my program wants to go, or this is how the client wants to go, and so I'm going to help them do that in the most defensible way possible, and advise them of the risks, and so that they can make the best decision. And that's one of the fun parts of the job, in my opinion, of being an agency attorney, is that you are working always in this gray zone, trying to balance resource allocation needs from lots of different angles and stakeholders. So, all right, let's see what Seth has for us next. Can the panelists share a story about a case or particular matter they've worked on that was especially interesting? Krishna, would you like to take this one?
Sure.
You've
I'm
done
not
some
sure what.
interesting work.
Sorry?
You've done some interesting work at EPA for sure.
Yeah. So I've kind of spearheaded a few different projects. I guess specifically related to FOIA requests was I don't know if there's I don't know how much like detail to give, but yeah, okay. So we had a request where an environmental group was asking for records about how EPA implemented a DOJ policy, which was a bit controversial. The policy was controversial, and so they were trying to get at what exactly EPA was doing in response to this policy, et cetera, et cetera. So first and foremost, I also don't have a environmental or technical background, so it was kind of a deep dive into what the implications of this policy were. I got to work with a group of people I had never worked with, and I got to work with OECA, which was an office I had never worked with before. So that was a good experience there. And then that case did go into litigation despite my best efforts for it not to. So a FOIA litigation, a requester can sue the agency for like lack of response, or they think the redactions are, misapplied, or the search was not done correctly. There's a variety of reasons people can sue for FOIA. And that was my first foray into litigation at all. I have not had experience with litigation. I was not a moot court person in law school. I ran from all that stuff actually, but it was a really good learning experience of, the FOIA is one thing and the statute is one thing, but once the FOIA goes into litigation, it's a whole different beast. Like, you're not even sometimes even concerned about the statute because you're arguing over weird procedural stuff, right? It's not even about the statute in some parts of it. So that was something interesting I got to work on. I suppose I can say what it was about because it's a public request and the records have been released, but it was about DOJ's policy about supplemental environmental projects, which they had stopped for certain situations a while ago. And then, so this environmental group wanted to know what enforcement cases within EPA were affected by this policy.
Yeah, that was an interesting project. Yeah, I know that you learned a lot working on it. It's
Yeah,
that's
not
cool.
despite my disappointment of being sued on it, but that's okay.
Well, thank you, Krishna. Manuel, what about you? What's a particularly interesting case or matter that you've been able to work on?
Well, I'll use a current event that's in the public eye right now. Out in Pearl Harbor, the Navy had a release of oil into an aquifer that is used for drinking water in Oahu. So, as you can imagine, this is it's a very high-profile site, a very high-profile issue. You know, the governor's involved, Hawaii regulatory agencies are involved. We're involved at headquarters. Region 9, our regional office out of San Francisco is heavily involved, and the Department of Justice is involved. So it right now is just a real interesting, hot topic. Lots of meetings, lots of discussions, trying to find the path forward. To you know, keep this drinking water source potable and safe, and you know, all the good stuff. So won't go into any more specifics, but that's kind of something big and exciting that's been going on right now.
Sounds really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Tracy, what's something interesting that you?
I have unmuted myself before the question. Yes. My interesting case is going to be weird, but I worked on a Superfund case that made it to the Supreme Court some years back. Don't ask me the exact name of the case anymore because I don't remember. But it was in a different administration, and the arguments that the Solicitor General wanted to make were losers. And we spent a lot, myself and my colleague Earl Salo, who has since retired, spent a lot of time prepping them, you know, going through moot courts, trying to convince them to, you know, not make certain arguments because they would not work, that they, you know, just, and the Supreme Court ruled against us, the US, 9-0. And I got a performance award for my efforts to prepare, you know, the Solicitor General for a case that they lost soundly. But, you know, our management knew that we had gone in there with the right, you know, trying to provide the right advice. But again, you know, it was one of those situations where the argument was going to be made in a way that, you know, was a bit foul, you know, you hold your nose. And so we did that. We supported them. You know, we supported their efforts. We helped with, you know, drafting, you know, the, you know, briefs and everything. We did as much as we could to support that, but at the same time trying to inform them that their perspective of the case was just totally wrong. And so I've never been so happy to receive an award for something that was, you know, a sound, you know, defeat for the U.S. government at court.
How interesting. Yeah, that's I think I lost your audio, Tracy.
Oh, that's because I stopped talking and muted myself.
Oh, well, I'm having a little bit of internet weirdness, so I think the video was just lagged. So, okay, great. I didn't want to miss anything you said. All right, and finally, Victor, what's an interesting matter that you've worked on?
So I was opening other windows, trying to see what's public, like what the EPA has done press releases on. But something that's more recent
Yeah.
that is fun to do. Yeah, trying to figure out what can I share in this year. So one of the more interesting and kind of rewarding things, as I mentioned before, one of the team members for environmental justice for OECA, so focusing on that. So last year, in the first couple of days of the new administration, there was an executive order 14008, which directed the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, along with a government-wide effort to focus on environmental justice. And so our office, OECA, worked on developing a series of policies that focused on cleanup enforcement and environmental justice. Well, environmental justice for criminal enforcement, civil enforcement, and cleanup enforcement. So cleanup enforcement is what I do. So having the opportunity to, hold the pen, and I was looking back, no fewer than 20 drafts of this policy as it came out, and reconcile all the comments and work on something that has an impact, and now is moving towards implementation, and a lot of the stuff that the administrator is working on now, returning to justice, I think is really neat and really cool to be on the front lines of those issues. So I think that's been a high profile, continues to be a high profile issue that the administration is working on right now.
Sounds really interesting. And Seth tells me that I'm a little delayed, so I will lean on Seth to tell me if I need to stop talking or something. But I've also had a really great experience in my 15 years working in environmental law and information law. I don't even know where to start with all of the fun or interesting matters that I've been involved in, from the BP oil case to just going to court at the state level in Indiana, and here at EPA. Just, it's so interesting to be able to work on kind of the most high profile projects that are going on in the agency, because those are the projects that the FOIA expert assistance team works on generally. When there's something big happening, the public and others want information about it. So we get involved in all the cool projects going on all over the agency, which is one of the best parts of the job. So I get to learn about those things and work with those teams all across the agency. We have about 7 minutes for this part, and so I am looking through all of the questions that have come in, and Seth has given me a few. And let's see here. A lot of folks are interested in how to get a job at EPA, and so I think maybe we could talk about tips for interviewing, since that seems to be something that a lot of people are interested in. And I think, I don't know if all of you have been part of the interview process here at EPA, but you can talk about how you prepared for interviews, and I think most of you probably have by this point in your career, have been on these panels. So Christian, again, we'll start with you. What are your tips for interviewing with the EPA?
Sure. I mean, the basics: make sure there's no stains on your clothes, make sure everything is buttoned properly, and all that. I know it's a little antiquated, but people do notice how you're dressed and how you put yourself together. And I know, not to say like everyone needs to go out and buy like $1,000 suit or something like that, but with what you have, look presentable, put yourself together, and I would say, as far as the actual interview, know the subject matter as best as you can. If you're fresh out of law school, obviously you're not going to have a lot of experience or, deep knowledge about anything in particular. I know at least I didn't, but know the background of the agency you're working at. If you're interviewing for a FOIA position, look at the latest FOIA reports on the DOJ website. What's the volume that comes into the agency? Do a little bit of background, a little bit of research into that. Just have an idea of the specific agency you're going into. And I will share a little slightly embarrassing story. When I interviewed for Department of Energy, DOE, DOE is also Department of Education. So I roll up to this job, Department of Education. I have, like, you know, I know which exemptions they use most often, how much their volume is. And then I all of a sudden realize I've looked up the wrong thing altogether. So there's me furiously waiting for my interview to start on my phone, like looking up Department of Energy statistics. So, you know, pay attention. Like, you can never be too detail oriented when it comes to a job interview, and have some questions prepared to ask back to interviewers. You know, what's a typical work day like? What are some projects the office is currently working on? What kind of flexibilities are offered, you know, within the work schedule? You know, it doesn't all have to be about the specific subject matter of the office, but it's always good to have questions to ask, because it really does show you're interested in the position and you're interested in the agency and the office.
Thanks, Risha. Manuel, what are your tips for interviewing?
I think you should keep in mind that interviewing is a skill. So the more you do it, hopefully the better you get at it. I'm a big proponent of applying for any job that I'm tangentially excited, not even excited about, but interested in. You know, I'll apply, I'll put in, I'll interview, and you know, it's like you get rejected for more jobs than you get, you know, and at some point, you know, it just becomes kind of second nature. You just let it roll off your back. I don't sweat it anymore, but over time, you just get better at the interview process. You learn kind of the canned questions that you always seem to get, and you can practice those, and you know, even practice in front of the mirror, just your own mannerisms and things like that, so that you come off as comfortable. As Christian was saying, as Christian was saying, you should definitely research ahead of time, but also be a good listener, and you know, ask questions, insightful questions. You know, it's no secret, people like to talk about themselves. So you know, if you turn it around on interviewers, you kind of get, you know, it just is human nature. You kind of get an extra shine to yourself, even though you haven't really done anything. So it's all these small skills that you can look up online of how to interview, just the skill of interviewing. And I think they really pay off, or at least maybe in my head, I think they pay off, and they make me feel good after I don't get a job in an interview.
Thanks, Manuel. Tracy, what are your tips for interviewing?
Nothing too much different from what's already been said. I know in the virtual world that we're in now, this might not be a good tip, but make eye contact if you're interviewing with people face to face. You know, don't look at your shoes, or you know, look at the, you know, whatever you have in your hand. Try to, you know, maintain eye contact with the interviewer. I like what Manuel said about, you know, turning it around on the interview. You know, be prepared to ask questions. Listen to what's being said, so you can ask questions about what, you know, if they said something, even if you really already know what it is they're talking about, ask a question just so they show that you're interested. You know, so if they mention my favorite PFAS, ask them, oh, you know, I've heard a lot about this PFAS and you just mentioned it. What exactly is PFAS? You know, and it gets them talking, which, you know, sometimes if you've got a, you know, hour-long interview, it might be nice to, you know, to be able to sit back and listen and ask, you know, ask questions. Be prepared to, you know, be prepared with some good questions based on what you've researched, not just, you know, oh, so how long have you worked at EPA? Or, you know, if you know that they've worked in, you know, if you've done your research on them, and you know that they worked somewhere else before they came to the office they're in now, ask them about what they, you know, worked on at that place. But again, it's just, I think you know, be engaged, be actively involved in the interview, instead of just anxiously waiting with, you know, hoping that the next question is something that's going to, you know, send you into a tailspin. And you know, and if you get asked a question that you're not quite sure how to answer, be honest and just say, can you give me a minute to, I really hadn't thought about this yet. Let me, if it's okay, I'd like a second to kind of, ruminate on it a little bit before I respond. And that shows that you're not just, because I think if you force yourself to give an answer, you're going to probably say something that isn't going to be as impactful as you think. But if you give yourself, allow yourself a few minutes to think about your response, then you might pull together something that actually, the interviewer will be, oh, okay, this is, they've thought about it for a few minutes. They gave a thoughtful response as opposed to some crap that just literally comes, pardon my word choice, but crap that you literally just comes straight out of your mouth, and then you cringe for the rest of the interview, trying to wish that you could retract it.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And finally, Victor, and I am cognizant that we are getting over time here, so we'll wrap it up after this question.
Absolutely, I'll be brief. So during the interview process, you are the subject of conversation. So make sure that you know the points on the stuff that you have on your resume. If you have an internship or a clerkship or something that's unique, have a few talking points on each of those items. That way, if folks ask, oh, you had this interesting 2L clerkship, please tell me about what you did there. That way you're not floundering, and understand your resume, know it in and out, and know the things that you have on there, because it shows that you have attention to detail. And then lastly, I think one of the most important things is authenticity. To be who you are, to show what you bring to the organization for any interview. That's not to say that you're going to be lackadaisical or too laid back. You can still be authentic and professional and put your best face forward. So I think that showing who you really are and showing what you have to offer, and especially knowing your experiences, really will serve you well in interviews.
Thank you to everyone. I want to make a final plug for the job openings that we have currently available here at EPA, so you can come work with me and these fine folks. I think there are 4 or 5 openings in OGC right now. There are openings in Region 10, Region 9, Region 5, and the Environmental Appeals Board wanted me to be sure to let you know that they have openings coming up. There's a law clerk opening in Boston. There's a student trainee that's legal in Chicago, Illinois right now. Many of us have summer honors programs, so be sure to look for those. And I will say we were not able to get all of your questions, but feel free to follow up with any of us. Our emails are first name, last name @epa.gov. And you can reach out to me, walker.denise@epa.gov. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to ELI for hosting, and I'll turn it back over to Chandler to close us out.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to our audience for joining us today and for your many thought-provoking questions, and an enormous thank you to our outstanding panelists. We just really appreciate your many contributions to today's program. Thank you all so much. Please take care and stay safe. And thank you all once again.
Thank you.